Well, as many of you know, I'm Baylor. I am the outreach manager with Tennessee Achieves, and I work on our mentor team. And today we are going to talk about the FAFSA and answer all of your questions. And we have our colleague Corey Martinez here to help us. He is on our Knox Access team. If you want to introduce yourself, Corey, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like Baylor said, my name is Corey. I'm with our Knox Access team here at Tennessee Achieves. My job here in Knox County is to actually work with high school students, getting college going completions done, really just getting into that college access space and making sure they get all the requirements they need in order to make that transition from high school to college pretty smooth. Like she said, we're going to be talking about FAFSA today as well, which, as you guys know, the deadline is coming up here in about a month. So, this is something I'm kind of in the middle of every single day working with kids on. I actually was just working with a student this morning on some FAFSA stuff and plan on doing it later this evening as well at a FAFSA night here at a local high school. So, we just want to talk to you about like high level FAFSA stuff about what you can expect. Number one, both students and a parent are going to need to have what is called an FSA ID. This is just an account for doing FAFSA, right? It's super simple to complete. They're not going to need any information on hand. It's all going to be personal. Just social security, phone number, name, that kind of stuff. Once they have that, they will be able to log in and do the FAFSA. Now, only one of them should be doing it at one time. If they try to do it at the same time, it gets really wonky and the system does not like that. So one of them will complete it and invite the other one, but both sides need to be completed in order for it to be fully done. Both a student section and a parent section have to be finished before it is considered submitted. So we will want them to go ahead and walk through that and actually sign it and make sure that they have it fully submitted to the Department of Education, and that's when their submission date will be, which has to be before that April 15th deadline.
Thank you, Corey. That's a really great overview. Yeah, like Corey said, the FAFSA really is truly supposed to be a pretty simple process. You make those logins, you do the basic information, and then you sign it. So really, it should be easy. They actually overhauled the FAFSA last year, and so it's supposed to be way more streamlined than it was prior. And we are really excited about those changes as well. Corey, can you talk to our mentors about what's one piece of advice they can offer if a student runs into an issues? Like we said, the FAFSA is supposed to be very easy, but oftentimes you can run into a technical error, you can run into a question that you don't quite know. What is one piece of advice that you would give our mentors as they help these students navigate this process?
Biggest piece of advice, and this is like a pretty common IT piece of advice as well, is just to use like a different browser, a different device, like something to get them off of the one that they're trying it on. I'm not entirely sure why. I don't know a ton about like the way the computer stuff works, but sometimes being on a computer with a ton of like history or save stuff can really make it um, not like what it's putting in. So just try like something that they wouldn't normally use. Honestly, an incognito browser is my best friend when working with students on their FAFSA.
Yeah, sometimes that history can just mess it up. So you clear the cache, you open up an incognito browser, and it can make that a little bit easier. I will offer a piece of advice myself. When you're creating these logins, have your student take a photo of their login information. This is going to be something that they use every single year that they're enrolled in college. And so they're going to have to come back to this application with the same log information every single time. And you can reset your password and username, but it tends to be a little bit of a pain. And so if they have a picture of it stored in a separate folder on their phone, it makes this whole process so much easier because really one of the biggest parts of doing the FAFSA that first time is just creating the login information. Once you have all of that, the application itself is pretty simple. Wouldn't you say, Corey?
Yeah, absolutely. Parents and students are always asking me how long it takes, and generally it'll take like 10 minutes per side. So it really is simple and quick once you're able to get into it.
Yeah, and that was going to be another question. Like, how long does it typically take? And yeah, I would say the same thing. It's never taken me more than 20 minutes to help a student, unless they run into like a technical error
Mhm.
that I can't figure it out at the time. If a student does run into an issue with their FAFSA and that incognito browser or that clearing the cache isn't working, what would you have the student do next? A lot of times, the students come to the mentor, they've tried to fill out their FAFSA, and they're just continually running into this issue. What would you have them do? Who would you have them reach out to at that point?
Great question. So my very first instinct is always screenshots, right? Just a screenshot so that you can see actually what the issue is. Some of the issues are very specific, and so just by seeing them a couple of times, you're able to get an idea for what the solution might be. Always take it to somebody at the school who probably deals with FAFSAs more often. Counselors can be really great for that. They have to host FAFSA nights and help students with those a lot as well. If none of that works, if like the screenshot, you don't know what it's saying, you don't know any of that stuff, my recommendation is always to reach out to FAFSA. You can always give them a call, or I mean, my personal favorite thing to do is to start up a live chat with them. They tend to be pretty quick. They tend to go through that pretty fast. So that's always my recommendation. They are very responsive. They haven't been necessarily in the past, but this year they've been really great about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would say absolutely point them towards their financial aid department at their college, point them towards our staff. We would be more than happy to help them. We have 50 team members that are here to help these students every single day. So if you run into an issue that's not like, what website do I log into? How do I make this login information? Send it to somebody on our staff, and we would be more than happy to help the student figure that out. And then also call that FAFSA helpline because those people are going to be able to get to the bottom of the issues as well. Another question that we have, so when a student is filing their FAFSA, this is one that we get very frequently. There's two ways to classify students. There's a dependent student and independent student. Corey, can you talk about what is the difference and then how our students typically are going to be qualified?
Yeah, so the main difference when it comes to the FAFSA is really just where the income is going to be coming from. For those of you who may or may not know, FAFSA really what it wants to look at is household income to determine how much financial aid is going to a student. So it just wants to know whose income it needs to look at. If they are a dependent student, it just means it wants to look at parent income. And if they are an independent student, it means they want to look at the student's income, which sometimes can be none, right? A lot of high school students don't work a ton. There will be dependency questions in the FAFSA that ask you about this. What I find is they mainly fall into three categories. Is the student in the military? Does the student have children? And has the student ever lived with anybody that is not their parents and has had somebody else have legal custody or guardianship over them?
Yeah, that's a really great qualification. Typically, all of our students are going to be dependent students unless they have a child or they've been in some type of situation with their family. But most of our students are going to be a dependent student, meaning that their parents are going to need to provide information on the FAFSA in order for them to qualify for federal financial aid. And so, encouraging your students to get their parents to do their FAFSA as quickly as possible is super important. A lot of times we can get the students to do their portion. We have direct communication with them, but having them encourage their parents. All of um, you also have the parents' information. We want to wait until a little bit closer to the deadline for y'all to reach out to the parents directly. But when it gets closer up to that time, if your student still hasn't submitted their portion or their complete FAFSA, you are more than welcome to kindly reach out to the parents as well and just encourage them to submit their portion as well. Tyler, would you have any advice on that part of the equation?
Yeah, in terms of connecting with parents,
Yes,
as it
yeah.
relates to that. Yeah, it's a great question. And I appreciate Baylor and Corey for talking us through this today. I think there's a lot of times that sort of push and pull when it comes to mentors and connecting with parents because while I think we all know that you can reach out to a 17 or 18-year-old and say, hey, you need to do this. Hey, you've got a deadline coming up and take a little bit more of a forward tone. There's sometimes a little bit of a hesitancy, and rightfully so, to do that with their parents, right? Many of whom are your peers or, whatever it may be. And so my advice in this space is, to Baylor's point, I think, I wouldn't necessarily get too pushy with parents unless you're hearing from their students that, hey, I can't get them to do it. Can you help? And if you do have to reach out to parents to kind of nudge them to get their part of the FAFSA done, take a really affable, for lack of a better word, tone, right? Approach it from a perspective of, hey, I was just talking to your student, Corey. They said they've gotten their FAFSA done. That's a huge step. I'm really proud of Corey for getting that done. There's a part that you need to complete. Would you mind to help him out and get that taken care of before April 15th? And we'll talk about this here in a couple minutes, provide them with a link to a FAFSA filing resource, provide them with a tool that they can use to get that FAFSA done. I wouldn't, I would avoid taking that really direct, really forward tone with a parent. I would take that more, affable tone that really says, hey, they're working towards this. It's a big step. How can we help you help them get this done by that April 15th deadline?
And I found that most parents just haven't done their portion just because it can be a complicated document and maybe they don't know where to start. So you can always reach out by saying like, "Hey, I see your student hasn't submitted their FAFSA yet. Like if y'all have any questions, please let me know. I have resources that I can connect you to." And that's a great way to approach the conversation as well because you do have a lot of resources available to you, including our Tennessee Achieve staff, and we would be more than happy to help answer these parents' questions. So just connecting them with the right resources so that they can get that application complete is super important. Okay. And then the final question that we have is how will students know when their FAFSA has been successfully submitted? Corey, can you tell us
Good
a little bit
question.
about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the things they will get a definite response on. So the U.S. Department of Education, which is who they're submitting the FAFSA to, will shoot them an email that says your FAFSA has been submitted and it will give a certain date. They will also receive an email when it has been fully processed, which just means when the Department of Education has a chance to look at it and assign the amount of financial aid they're getting. But they should get email communication both on the submission and the processing.
Yeah, that's a really great piece of advice. Yeah, your student will get a submission email that their FAFSA has been completed. And at the end, if after they like hit submit, it'll say like, congratulations, your FAFSA has been successfully submitted at the top. So they should know when they get that. And then a couple of weeks later, really a couple days later, that will be uploaded into our system. Right now, we have about a 2 week lag time from it getting to the federal government to us, but that will start to speed up as we get closer to this deadline as well. So if they say, hey, I submitted my FAFSA, but I'm still getting texts from Tennessee Achieves that they haven't gotten it, it's really important to ask, like, what day did you submit your FAFSA? If you submitted it yesterday, that's not going to be in our system yet. If you submitted it in December, you should let us know. There might be something going on and we need to figure that out. That is really great. Thank you so much, Corey.
Can I actually chime in with something there too?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would, in every case too, if a student reaches out to you and says, "Hey, I just did this," first of all, celebrate that win. It's
For
a
sure.
big win. I mean, the FAFSA is, to Corey's point earlier, it should not actually take that long if it works according to plan. But also, at the same time, it is one of the more intimidating steps in the college process. And so, take a moment, celebrate that win with your student, celebrate that accomplishment, because truthfully, no one else may be celebrating it for them, but it deserves to be celebrated, I think, because it takes a little bit of time and it takes some commitment. But the other thing is encourage them to hang on to that email. I would say, hey, go back in your email, get a screenshot, download it onto your computer, do whatever you have to do to keep that record. Because as Baylor said, while we operate on a bit of a data lag in terms of that getting to us, if there ever does become a snag or a hang up where we're not seeing that FAFSA is filed, it's going to be really, really helpful for the student, for our team to have that confirmation email that Corey talked about just a moment ago. And one thing that is very true about high school seniors, about your mentees, is that they oftentimes change phone numbers, they oftentimes change email addresses. And so what we definitely don't want to happen is for a student to change their email address, lose access to that confirmation, and have to dig for it later on. So encourage them to hang on to that email just in case they should need it later on.
Absolutely, yeah. Screenshots are your best friend when it comes to FAFSA. Screenshot your login, screenshot your submission email, all of those good things. And like Tyler said, This really is one of the more intimidating processes of the college going admissions process, but it really isn't that big of a deal when you actually get into it, but it can be scary on the front end. So celebrating your students is super important every step of the way. With that being said, Corey, obviously we have the FAFSA due April 15th. But can you talk about some other deadlines that we have coming down the pipe in the college admissions process?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are obviously different deadlines for college applications, right? A lot of them for the big state colleges have already gone through. So this is a great time to look at a lot of those community college applications if students haven't applied or if they didn't get in necessarily to the place that they want to go. Those are going to be rolling, so you should be able to get those done whenever students come to you or whenever you have those conversations. You do, of course, have the big Tennessee Promise deadline of community service, which is in July. But then you also should start looking at general deadlines for completing the graduation requirements. Things like getting your cap and gown, making sure you're reporting and having like your meetings with your senior counselor. A lot of the times they'll want to do exit meetings with students. All of those are just going to be stepping stones on the road to graduation. And then of course you have orientation and registration, which generally happens with the college towards the end of the year. Most of the time those won't start until April, May, and then they'll have to attend some sort of orientation over the summer.
Yeah, that's really great advice, Corey. And this is a great place to plug our Mentor Monday email. Please keep up with those. Make sure that you're reading those every Monday because we will provide advice on what to be talking about with your students at this point in the college going process. And so that you'll have a good idea of what are the conversations I need to be having right now? What's relevant in the college going process at this exact point? So right now it's the FAFSA, right now it's applying to college, all of those good things. But come the summer, it'll be getting enrolled in your classes, meeting with your admissions requirements, all of those type of things as well. So just make sure that you're keeping up with your Mentor Monday email as well. I know that many of you have asked questions in the Q&A box, and we are going to get to that in just a second. But Tyler, will you show us a couple of the resources for the FAFSA that mentors can share with their students? You are muted.
How embarrassing. Yes, I would be happy to. So, I want to walk through just a couple great resources that I think that you can work with on your, or excuse me, point your students to in the FAFSA filing space. As Baylor mentioned earlier, we do not expect you as a volunteer mentor to have all the answers in the college going process, to have all the answers specifically about the FAFSA. I would stress that it is not your role to have to go into the weeds on FAFSA filing, to have to get into some of this personal financial information. Instead, what we ask from you is that you say, hey, that's a great question about the FAFSA. Let's find the answer. Let's get you in touch with someone who can help in this situation. If you feel comfortable providing an answer, that is great, but don't put yourself in a stressful situation or in a situation where you're having to do hours and hours of digging. That just isn't a fair expectation for us to put on you, and certainly we don't expect it as you work with your students. But I do want to share with you just a couple resources that I think are great jumping off points in working with your students. Let me get this up here. All right, can you see my screen? Okay,
Yeah, I can see your screen. You have the
perfect.
handbook up.
Wonderful. Well, the first thing I want to point you to is your mentor handbook. And I will stress that the mentor handbook is a mirror image of the student handbook. And so the information you see here in front of you is the exact information that your students have access to. And anytime your students reach out and say, how do I file the FAFSA? Where do I go to file the FAFSA? What steps are they? This is the page that I would send to them, right? I would send them a link to the student handbook, which we can post here in the chat just in a moment, and say, hey, go ahead and go to page number 7, page 5 in the student handbook, and give that 10-step FAFSA filing process outline a look. Does that match up with steps you've taken? Is this a helpful resource? I will tell you, in having worked with students through this process for many years now, oftentimes texting this page alone, getting this on their radar is the thing they need to get the FAFSA filed successfully. They are quite literally just looking for a little bit of direction, and that's what this page does. So I would encourage you to leverage that mentor handbook, leverage this tool as a resource in ensuring that students have the information they need to successfully file the FAFSA. course, you can also post them, excuse me, send them to our website, right? We've got a FAFSA filing page laid out. You can find it here on the screen right now. And the most helpful tools here are going to be that we have a link directly to the FAFSA. There's also a list of FAFSA filing resources, and there's a step-by-step guide on how to create that FSA ID that Corey talked about earlier, and an online copy of those 10 steps towards filing the FAFSA. Again, a lot of times students just need these steps broken out piece by piece, and that's exactly what this website does for your students. So refer them back to our website. And you'll also find that on our website, there's a full list of our staff and of our team. And so if you're ever like, hey, why don't you reach out to a member of the Tennessee Achieves team? Obviously, you can put them in touch with Baylor, myself, and we'll be happy to help, but they can also reach out via that page on our website. The final tool that I'll point you to, and I think this is one of the most helpful resources, is the College for TN website. This is a state resource, excuse me, that combines several step-by-step videos on how to file the FAFSA. And so if your student is maybe having a bit more trouble, maybe they're a little bit lost even with that 10-step guide in the handbook or on our website, perhaps you pass this along to them and encourage them to watch some of these videos that are really top-notch videos put together by our partners at THEC and TSAC. Encourage them to leverage this resource, familiarize themselves with the FAFSA more, and make sure that they're on the right track towards getting it filed. So these are three great resources that I think can offer you and your students a lot of relief in the FAFSA filing space. Can serve as a great tool that you point your students to if they do have questions or concerns. But again, I will stress that, anytime it gets a little bit tricky, if you don't feel comfortable, if you're not quite sure how to answer, get them in touch with us and we will get that student taken care of. Baylor, I think it would be kind of valuable to talk about too, you know, should every student that a mentor is working with file the FAFSA, or should just their Tennessee Promise students be filing the FAFSA?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So it is very important that every student files the FAFSA. This is not the application for just Tennessee Promise. This is how students qualify for all federal and state aid. So things like the Pell Grant, the Hope Scholarship, the TSAA Award. In addition, a lot of institutional scholarships also require that their students submit the FAFSA so that they can qualify for the other federal and state aid prior. And so it is super important, regardless of where your student is attending, that they complete this application. So even if your student's going to UT, even if they're going to the University of Hawaii, they still need to complete the FAFSA. So very super important that all of our students, regardless of where they attend, complete the FAFSA. Yes, that's a great question, Tyler.
I
And I
think it's
will
good to touch on.
Oh, yeah. And I will also touch on something that Tyler said. A lot of your students, the main thing that they're going to need from you in regards to the FAFSA is just a little bit of a push. Send them the link for where they go to file the FAFSA. Send them that 10-step guide because this, honestly, they are 18 years old. This is one of their first times interacting with a federal application, some type of federal document. And they can be intimidated. I remember being 18 and being like, I just don't know where to start, so I'm not going to do it until somebody tells me exactly what to do. And so they just need a little bit of hand holding to get started on the process. But really, a lot of the questions that you're going to get are not going to be super complicated. And those resources should be able to help your students troubleshoot. And like Tyler said, if you find yourself doing hours of research, we do not want you to have to do that. You are just a volunteer. So please send it our way. That is why we get paid. We are experts in this space, so we would be more than happy to help you figure that out as well. Tyler, I know we got some questions in the Q&A box, in that chat box. Can you touch on some of those?
Yes, and I will say this is, I believe, our second webinar this year, and the class of 2025 mentor cohort, excuse me, is coming in hot with some great questions this year. So kudos to everyone for joining us here today and bringing some great questions. One of the first questions that I've got is, let me find it here. What are the days and weeks of time and times that FAFSA experts are available? When should students be reaching out for FAFSA filing assistance? I think this is Corey, Baylor, either of you can take this.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Well, our team is available really anytime. You're probably going to get a slower answer from us on the weekends, but we try and get back to students and mentors as well in about a 24-hour turnaround period. So students should reach out as soon as they have a problem. That would be my best advice. Corey, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I think that's great advice. If you want to reach out directly to FAFSA, I have found that they actually are available after hours several times during FAFSA nights that I've had at high schools. Whenever students and families have had trouble logging in or with anything, I've been able to call or start a chat with FAFSA directly, and they've gotten back to me. So they have somebody available to reach out to after hours as well if you need like an immediate answer and one of us is not necessarily getting back as quickly as you would like.
Yeah, that's great advice to Corey.
Yeah, great advice. Um, Next question is if Tennessee Achieves is getting notice and finding out when students are filing their FAFSA, how can mentors find that out in real time? Where can they go to look for that? How are students being notified that they filed their FAFSA? But I think most importantly, where can mentors find that information?
Yeah, that is a really great question. So on your mentor portal that we include in every single Monday email, there is going to be a section that says 2025-2026 filing status or FAFSA filing status. And it will let you know, yes, if your student has filed it, no, if they have not. And it actually includes an as of date. So right now, the last time that we pulled FAFSA information in from the federal system was 3/11. So just 2 days ago. So really all of it should be pretty up to date at this point, but you can see that as of date. And like I said before, that's going to be an important question to ask your students. Like, hey, you filed your FAFSA, you got a text from Tennessee Achieves that said you hadn't. When did you file it? Did you file it today? If so, it's going to take a few days to upload in that system. You are good to go. But digging in a little bit more if it is before that as of date, because we should have that. And if that does occur, if your student submitted their FAFSA in January and Tennessee Achieves still is sending them texts that say no, please contact somebody on our staff, and we would be more than happy to dig in and see what those issues are. Sometimes they put in the wrong social security number when they're filing their FAFSA, or the wrong year, or they file last year's FAFSA. So there's many things that it could be, and we would be more than happy to troubleshoot that information with your students as well. That's a great question.
And that actually goes along well, Baylor, with, and this isn't so much a question, but there's a great comment from Janet in the chat about there's a mix up. Parent was doing the student part, student was doing the parent part. Your point ties in well with this. Luckily, in the case of Janet's student, got it filed, everything's taken care of. Everyone was celebrating, but encourage your students and their parents to take their time when it comes to filing the FAFSA. A lot of times, some of the snags Baylor mentioned are quite honestly just simply caused because of a typo, because just a small error somewhere along the line leads to that challenge later on, and so. Any chance you get to provide just general advice about filing the FAFSA, encourage your student and their parents to take their time and make sure they're getting it filed the right way the first time, because that definitely reduces stress later on.
Absolutely, yeah. Taking your time, making sure you're entering the correct information to your knowledge is super important. Sometimes students are like, I don't know my parents' social security number, so I'm going to put a random number. We don't want them to do that. We want them to take their time and enter the accurate information to the best of their abilities. Obviously, there's going to be mistakes along the way, and we can work to get those fixed. But like Tyler said, you can mitigate a lot of that work on the front end if you take your time and pay attention.
Yeah, and for those two, some in the chat are wanting to see the FAFSA line by line. I would encourage you to access those videos, those College for TN videos, which I will post here in the chat here in just a moment. Those do go line by line through the FAFSA. During this webinar, we truly just want to provide some high-level tips, some guidance for mentors, but those do exist as a great resource if you do want to build familiarity with kind of the line by line process there. Has there been any changes? Would students ever need to pay back Tennessee Promise funds if they receive?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, at no point should your student have to pay back any Tennessee Promise funds. It is not a it's not a scholarship that you would have to pay back. So students should feel free to use it, utilize it, take advantage of this opportunity, go to college. Like I said before, you do not have to pay it back. So it's worth a shot if you decide that you get into college and maybe you want to do a trade and switch it. You don't, at no point do you need to pay back your scholarship. So it really is worth filing the FAFSA, getting enrolled in college, and encouraging your students to do that, even if they're not sure this is quite the right path for them. That's a great question, Tyler.
Yeah, that's always good to think about if you're a student, I think. The other thing too that I will address really quickly, yes, if a student wants to receive the Tennessee Hope Scholarship, the Tennessee Promise Scholarship, they have to file the FAFSA. That applies for all federal aid too. So federal Pell Grants, they've got to file the FAFSA. And for Tennessee Promise, they have to get it done by April 15th in order to stay eligible. Just a couple more questions here. I'll just breeze through a couple of these really quickly. Um, Let me see here. Uh, Corey, can you talk a little bit about when a student would find out how much aid they're receiving?
Yeah, good question. So, from the federal government, from like the actual Department of Education, they will find out how much aid they will be receiving once their FAFSA has been processed. So, once that happens, they can log into their account, they can look at what's called a FAFSA submission summary, and it will tell them exactly how much aid they are estimated to be getting. That is pretty easy to find once you are actually in the FAFSA after it has been processed. But once that status changes, and they will receive an email when that status changes, they will be able to go in and look at that aid they're going to receive.
Excellent answer. Thank you. The final thing that I want to touch on here is there are some questions in the chat in the Q&A. First of all, asking what happens if the site is down. That has been happening. Actually, Corey, correct me if I'm wrong here. That has been happening much less this year that we've been running into the site being down. Is that right?
Way less. Yes, it's been great. There have only been like a few spotty times, really, when the website is down, but 99.9% of the time it has been up and it's been running and it's been reliable, which has been fantastic.
So that's good news. But on that note too, it's not out of the realm of possibility that your student might try to access it and they find it's down. My best tip there is tell them to try again in an hour. A lot of times these are pretty temporary outages. If they run into it time and time again, have them reach out to our team and we can dig in there. But we don't anticipate that your students are going to face that challenge too terribly often. And again, if they do, let us know. The other question too is just as a general note, this question has popped up a couple times. Tennessee Achieves is always monitoring the college going landscape, the financial aid landscape, and how that might impact your students. And we're always working with our state partners as well to ensure that we have the most real-time, up-to-date information there. And so please know that as long as you are monitoring your emails and your text messages, and as long as you're encouraging your students to do the same thing, we will make sure that we have any necessary and critical information regarding the FAFSA, regarding financial aid to your students, regarding Tennessee Promise, excuse me, to your students in a timely manner. So do encourage you to keep up to date with us via those emails and via those messages, because anything that we know that'll be relevant to your students will work to get to you in a timely manner. That's all we have. If we did miss your question and we do our best to get to all of these, please do email them to Baylor or myself. I'll post our emails in the chat. I know we had a couple more in the weeds ones. Just send them there and we'll get them taken care of.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And log in next month to join us for our next one.
Thanks for joining us, Corey. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great.